Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're here with Klimchak, and he has agreed to meet with us today to answer a few questions. Thank you, Klimchak. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I
Well,
got my first vaccine shot yesterday, so my life is going good.
I did too yesterday. It
Really?
was, yeah, it was really actually a very pleasant experience.
Uh-huh.
We had a
Mine was too.
drive-through thing where you don't
Uh,
leave your car. Maybe that's a California deal, but
yeah, we didn't have that. I had to go into the football stadium for mine. So,
oh, wow.
yeah.
Well, on that happy note, thinking back, what was the sound that you heard all those years ago that started you on the path to where you are today?
Well, the sound I first remember hearing, and that was from so young, was drumming because I come from a family of drummers. My father was a drummer. He played with Cannonball Adderley for a while. My grandfather was a drummer. So the first thing I can remember is a drum set being set up in the house and played. So that was just kind of my path. I wanted to start playing drums, and I have pictures of me behind a drum set at age 4 or so. My father, kind of he told me that I had to learn piano first, and I really wanted to learn drums. And he said he wouldn't teach me drums until I'd learned piano. So he made me take piano for 4 years, and I hated it at the time. And I'm really grateful to him for giving me that 4 years and wish he had been tougher and made me stick with it, because it would certainly help me a lot more now to have stuck with piano. But drums is good, and I started drums at a very early age.
Wow, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is your process for writing a piece?
Well, I'm really a composer, so it sort of depends on the piece. I do a lot of work with people in different disciplines, and my process is very much related to kind of who I'm working with and in what method. If I'm working with a collaborator, we kind of find some common ground that we can talk about. Sometimes these people, they're dancers or videographers or even poets or sculptors, theater people. I do a lot of that. And so we have to find some area to talk about. And sometimes they know a lot about music, and sometimes they know nothing about music. So the process kind of depends on them and where we can find a common ground. I worked with one dancer once, and our entire musical collaboration involved colors. And she would say, "Oh, I think this section needs to be more purple." And I would take the word purple and try to decide what it meant to me, and would go home and write purple things and then bring them back. And of course, she would say, "Oh, no, that's too green." And then I would go back, and then I would begin to learn the language of what she meant by those colors. And that's kind of how the whole piece evolved. For solo stuff, I have a lot more choice, and I tend to go with either an exploration of a particular instrument or style, or a particular event or something that really interests me for the piece.
Very
So,
good. Is there a piece of gear that you find particularly inspiring that you will be using for Wonder Valley 13?
yeah, I mean, this piece is actually, well, there's a couple I want to talk about. One is, we talked about drum set and me and early, and I actually don't play drum set much anymore. I play it at home for my own pleasure, but I don't tend to do it live. And I decided for this piece it would be fun to do a drum set. So I am actually playing drum set and a bunch of gongs in this piece. But the instrument that I'm most interested in is an instrument called a wind wand, which is kind of like a bull roarer. It's a large 12-inch rubber band stretched between two sticks, and then with a stick in the middle that holds it out at a 60-degree angle. And you whirl it over your head like a bull roarer, and it makes a drone that's tunable. So I've built 3 or 4 of them for this piece, and I'm going to record them to overdub drones on top of my piece.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so...
Uh, could you speak a little bit to finding places for improv in composing?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, kind of improv is always part of what I do in some way. Even as a composer, like I said, I might pick an instrument or something I want to discover, so as part of the composing process. So in that case, the early phase of things would be just playing around on that instrument, pushing it and seeing what I can do with it. And so that improv eventually gets structured and written down and becomes part of the piece. If I'm doing a thematic piece, I tend to pick appropriate instruments for that theme and kind of experiment with them. So there's still some improv there. Then once the piece gets going, I try to find ways to write it so that there will be ways to do improv. I kind of find places, I tend to write at least one section of a piece that's almost unplayable for myself. And so in trying to do it live, I will inevitably screw up. And so part of the composition is when I do screw up, it's trying to find my way back to where I'm going with that. It's an idea I got from Gary Burton, the vibes player, who said, in jazz, one of the ways he recommended doing improv was to get something you're comfortable with and just kind of go into a trance with it. And invariably you'll go off of it. And the improv is learning how to get back onto it again. So I've kind of adapted that in my way of doing things. And sometimes I just write really very, very unlimited directions, like maybe, play paradiddles in an interesting manner. And, so for 2 minutes. So 2 minutes of that piece will be me trying to figure out each time I perform the piece how to do a new and interesting version of paradiddles or something like that. So all that's kind of written into my compositions.
That's great. Okay. Well, it sounds like you've worked in a variety of settings.
Yeah, I have.
And when you're working with people that are doing narrative stuff, like theater or soundtracks or things along those lines, and you're faced with finding common ground like colors, and how do you, so you described a situation where the color purple was used.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go home and decide what that is on your chosen instrument? Well, I mean,
honestly, the first time it's just sort of a random dive. It's what does that color feel like to me? That evolves into a language. It's like, I just, think, what does purple mean? What does purple mean? And I'll mumble that for a while and I'll pick up an instrument and I'll think, is this purple? And I'll try it a little bit and try something. And then I'll find something that I think is purple. And then I'll bring it back. And that's the moment where the real collaboration begins, because that forces the other person to give more information. I then get to learn what they think purple is not, if what it is. So by then them saying, oh, that's more green, then I know that in the future, when she says more green, I know that this is the basis for green, or this type of thing is the basis for green. So you build up maybe 7 or 8 different colors, and you've got kind of a composition, really, or at least the basis to make a composition. A bunch of different instruments, a bunch of different modes or melodic things or phrases or drones. In theater, it's a lot about drones, so, because there's dialogue over the top.
So just bear with me for a second.
Okay.
So when you're faced with somebody saying, play something purple, you just take it and go home and try to figure out what purple means to you, and you bring it back to them and see if you're on the same page. Is that kind of okay?
Right.
Yeah.
And then whatever they say, if you're on the same page, you've solved the problem of what purple is. If they don't like it, you ask them what color that is to them, and then you have another color that you know.
Right.
So whatever you offer becomes information. I mean, the information might be, like, I work with one theater director who's off the wall experimental. She loves everything odd, but the one thing she doesn't like is flutes. She just can't stand flutes. And I spent a really long time trying to come up with a flute sound for her that would get through this barrier, but there isn't one. She just really doesn't like them. So, I wouldn't have learned that because she wouldn't have offered, oh, and by the way, I hate flutes. It was more or less me doing through a process of a section of a Shakespeare play that seemed to me to be all about flute. So I pulled out a dozen different kinds of flutes and tried different things, and I kept trying them, and it finally dawned on me that what it really was she just doesn't like flutes. So I should put all those instruments away and not use them.
It's a constant discovery.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you got for Wonder Valley 13.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it. Take care.